I'm Arian Elfont, and this is Death the Podcast. Death may be defined as the destruction or permanent end of something. At Death the Podcast, we are looking closely at what happens when something ends. We listen, learn about, and discuss the stories that surround the subject of death. These stories bring up much more than feelings of fear and sadness. They offer opportunities for connection, for hope, and sometimes even for humor. Ultimately, if we are open to exploring death, we create greater potential to experience life. My guest today is Cole Imperi. I found Cole several months ago when exploring the subject of thanatology, which is the scientific study of death. Cole is a certified thanatologist, and when I stumbled upon her website, hellocole.com, I read all about her and discovered she had so much creative and varied experience that relates to the subject of death. Cole lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, but as fortune would have it, when I reached out to her, she indicated she would be visiting New Orleans for a conference, so we made plans to meet up and have this interview. Before we get started, just a little more about Cole. She is the owner and creative director of Doth, a company that helps people discover and develop their brand. She's a registered yoga teacher and a certified crematory operator. Cole is part of the teaching faculty for the ICCFA Cremation Arranger Certification Program, and she is a public speaker. Cole has a TED Talk out there entitled Lifted by Little Deaths. Finally, Cole is associate producer of a documentary, Mortal, which was just released. Through a series of conversations, Mortal seeks to encourage all of us to be more present in life and more open about discussing the end of life. I think it is pretty clear that Cole's passion and interests align well with Death the Podcast. Cole, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Wow. Hearing you say all that stuff, I was like, are you talking about me? Whoa, I did that?
You've done a lot. And what you can't see is how young Cole is to have done how much she's done. So tell me a little bit about how and why you felt called to the subject of death.
When I was 19, I actively chose to give up television. And that's kind of an odd thing for a 19-year-old. And for whatever reason, I really felt a connection to what you do with your time and how you spend your time. And in giving up television, for me at that time in my life, I was able to devote myself to study. And I started really intensely studying religious, just variety of religions. I have a degree in Judaic studies. I was raised Catholic. I really dove deep into Indian, into yoga and Hindu and Buddhism. And I learned to read and write biblical Hebrew. I wanted to be able to read the Bible in the native language and understand the linguistics of the time, because religion really exists, I found after all these studying it, to help us cope with life, which helps us cope with death. And that's really how I started. I didn't know I was going to end up where I am today back then, but that's where it began. Truthfully, it's an odd thing. Most 19-year-olds are interested in going out and trying to get alcohol and have a good time. And I'm like, no, let's read biblical Hebrew. So, yeah.
Well, I think most 19-year-olds, your average 19-year-old is somewhat, and even developmentally, one could argue that that's supposed to be that way, but pretty self-absorbed. And it sounds like you wanted to quiet things down.
Yes, definitely. And my religious studies sort of led me into a really intense yoga practice and study of yoga for years. And in the United States, this isn't actually often taught, but most people have had a yoga class or know about it. And at the end, there's this posture called Shavasana, where you lay on your back. It's the very end of class, and you're quiet, and you just lay in stillness. And the purpose of Shavasana, that translates to corpse pose, is to practice being dead. The purpose of yoga is to prepare yourself for your own death. Now, in the United States, we choose to brand yoga as this awesome workout, get this awesome butt and look really good and be flexible. But really what we're doing is supposed to be preparing for our own deaths and building a level of comfort with that. And that was why I was into yoga, because I really valued that sentiment. and it really resonated with me. And the people that spend time with death, that whether they think about it, or they meditate on it, or they're around it, those people tend to be more present in their lives, and they also tend to be better able to just emotionally connect with a stranger. And that's a quality that I wanted in my own life.
It seems like that connection of being present to life
Mm-hmm.
and your interest in death and understanding of death, that's a very important link.
Yes. So being present, it's kind of a general sort of thing, but a lot of times being present can be really uncomfortable, especially as we all move through parts of our life. Like, let's say that there's family conflict going on. Being present would mean you might have to face those family issues or pay attention to how you're feeling about it. One of the issues that I see repeated is most people grieve outside of the death of a person or an animal that they love. They're grieving a divorce. They're grieving that their kid, disappointed them. They're grieving the failure of a business. But most Americans have no idea that what they're experiencing is grief. When we get to end of life, and this is something that's a lot of hospice volunteers and hospice workers go through this training. Sometimes at the end of life, some people will have an experience where they're facing all of these things that they were not present with at the time. So end of life can be really hard and really uncomfortable for some people for those reasons, because all the stuff that they've carried with them is coming up, and it's like now or never, because then on top of that, it's compounded by, I am dying. I never said these things. I never did these things I wanted to do, and here I am. I'm in hospice, and the clock is ticking. It can be very overwhelming.
And that's one of the things you talk about in your TED Talk, and little deaths,
yes.
like the end of a job or the end of a relationship, that experiencing that grief is really valuable.
Yes, it's incredibly valuable. Grief is sitting on everybody's shoulder, and it's an incredible gift. Grief is truly, honestly, one of the greatest gifts in life. The first step is just having an awareness about, what are your griefs? What are you grieving? And it's okay to grieve whatever it is you are. Just being aware that you're experiencing grief is half the battle.
So can you talk us through a little death of yours?
Yeah. I can talk about one that is very personal and important to me and really shaped who I became. So I had a little death that happened almost 2 years ago. I was the victim of assault, crime. And I went to court, and all the stuff happened, and it was really difficult to face. But 1 in 4 women go through what happened to me, so it's very common. It was awful. It was so hard, especially in the first few months afterwards, because you go through these questions like, why me? Why is this happening? And everybody asks those questions when something major and traumatic and awful happens. It's like, why me? What did I do to deserve this? But once I got through that, I realized that I was not a good forgiver. I was not good at forgiveness in my own life. I would hold on to, I would never forget any wrong that someone had ever done to me. I mean, I could just whip it out. I could list it out. You know what I mean? And a lot of people are like this. It's like in the U.S., sort of culturally, we're really good at remembering who ticked us off. I mean, look at American history, right? So I guess I'm a really good American. But through that really awful experience, I forgave deeply in my heart the individual that did this to me. I mean, truly. And that was the first time that I really ever forgave someone. And it was incredibly freeing. And I'm so grateful that happened to me. I mean, incredibly grateful. And I wouldn't have gotten there had this horrible thing not happened, because I was present with it, and I had the angry days, I had the sad days, I had the hard days, I had the despondent days, I had the days where I couldn't even deal with it, but I was present to it. And that allowed me to get to where I am today. And I am grateful that that happened.
Well, and that seems to touch on another one of the things you talk about in your TED Talk, which is resilience. Like, I hear a lot of resilience as you're talking.
Yeah. So when this happened to me at first, I was remembering my TED Talk, because my TED Talk actually came from this experience, what happened to me. It was part of the healing process. Well, there were a lot of days where I was like, where's this resilience? Is there an online store where I can buy some of this? It's like I needed this battery pack to just get me over some of these really tough days. But what was amazing, I found this vulnerability thing. So when really difficult stuff happens to people, whether it's divorce or, a friendship fails, we tend to not want to talk about it, right? Because it's awkward. If at a party or when you're with a friend or something, you don't want to bring up the horrible stuff in your life because, oh, what do I say? What do I say? But I found that when I became more vulnerable and just outright shared with my closest friends what I was feeling or how angry I was on one day or how whatever, that vulnerability linked me closer to other people. And linking myself and being able to form stronger relationships with other people was absolutely integral in my ability to move through this, find the ability to forgive, and to become resilient from it. One of the things that I can do now, because this happened, is I can connect to a lot more people in a much more meaningful way. I can connect heart to heart with them. And that is another gift of grief and another reason why it is beneficial to talk about the hard stuff of life, because you're not the only person.
Yeah.
Nobody's the only person.
Well, it sounds like you really have an appreciation for both sides, that the fear and even terror that comes with walking all the way face to face with what scares us. Because we don't know what's going to happen.
Yes.
But then that if you do that something can come and result that you didn't have before.
Uncertainty. Many times when we're talking about physical death, like a human's going to die or even our pets are going to die, uncertainty is a lot of times the most difficult part. Well, what's going to happen? What does death feel like? There's uncertainty for the family. What's going to happen to, my loved one? What do I do while this is happening? Do I stand there? What do I, you know what I mean? Uncertainty is it might be the most challenging part of end of life for especially Americans, because we like to know what's going on. Americans are knowers. Right?
Yeah.
We're knowers. So death is the big uncertainty.
So is part of what you're saying that the more that we face uncertainty in our living world, the more prepared we are for that uncertainty that comes at the end?
Yes.
So when you were getting your degree in thanatology, tell me a little bit about that. What is the purpose of studying death and the wisdom that you gained? And
so I just completed my integrative thanatology program of study through the Art of Dying Institute, which is in Manhattan. The Art of Dying's integrative thanatology program, I really appreciate because they take a holistic view of it. So we learned every angle of end of life. We had Frank Ostaseki, the founder of the Metta Institute and Zen Hospice there. We had Dr. Simcha Raphael, who is a wonderful bereavement counselor. One of the things that I learned from Simcha is this thing that I have in my back pocket every day. There is only one thing more intimate than sex, and that is shared loss, shared grief. That's the most intimate you can get with somebody else, is when you both have shared a loss. I learned from Dr. Tony Bossas from NYU about psilocybin aka mushrooms, that are being they're in clinical trials, giving psilocybin doses to terminally ill patients to help ease their symptoms, depression, anxiety, all kinds of things. And it's working, and it's extremely beneficial, and there's like no side effects comparatively to a lot of the other drugs that are on the market. So the integrative thanatology program gave me a very broad and deep amount of information about the actual dying process. We learned a lot about existential pain and physical pain. Lots of conversations about what is consciousness. So when my body dies, when Cole, my physical water sack, dies, basically, where do I go? Where does my personality go? We can't find it on an X-ray scan. We know it's there somewhere, but it's not like a physical organ, right? So where does it go? These are the sorts of conversations and questions that we faced. And a lot of people at end of life, that's the first time that they ask that question. Where do I go when my body dies? Because I am not my body. I just live in it.
So how are we supposed to handle those questions?
So this is, so in, for example, hospice programs, there are hospice workers and then there's hospice volunteers. Many times people that are in hospice, they'll start to ask questions, if they're coherent, of course, about, where am I going to go when I die? And a lot of times our religious upbringing is what informs our thoughts about what happens after we die. For myself, if I'm ever with someone that is dying, my role is not to tell you all the different theories out there. It's to ask you the questions. Be like, well, what do you think? What does your heart think? What does your head think about where you go? What do you feel like happens? It is not my role to ever tell somebody where we go. Nobody knows. I haven't died and come back. I mean, if I did, I could probably make a lot of money, because I'd be like, guys, I found out what happens when the lights go out. Buy my book. And but I haven't done that. And we don't know. So it's that's what presence brings you at the end of life. Life may be more uncertain than death, because we all know we're going to die. Right? Mm-hmm. Guaranteed. We don't know what's going to happen while we're alive. That's more uncertain than anything else.
Well, I also really want to ask you about the documentary.
Oh yeah,
Mortal, that did just this week, right?
Yes,
has been released. So really good timing with getting to meet you. And so I want to ask about your involvement, and then ask you to describe a little bit about how you would language what the documentary is about.
So Mortal, most simple way to tell you what the film is about. It's about being mortal. It's about the fact that we're all going to die. It is not depressing. It is not upsetting. It's not like a super emotional film by any means. In fact, when I watched the whole thing just 2 weeks ago. I felt very inspired at the end. There's all kinds of stories, little vignettes that are told throughout it with people that are facing loss. There's a woman with ALS. There is people who are facing their death because of cancer or because of old age, children. And I know that that's sad, right? But keep in mind that we all are going to die and we all don't know when. Mortal is a tool that we all have access to start practicing that presence with death. We can be present to it by watching something like this. I really like it because it doesn't take you really deep into anything in particular. It gives you these quick little visits to all these little stories. And there's probably, what I like is that there's something that anybody can identify with in their life. You probably know someone who has had ALS. You probably know someone who's had cancer. And there are some people that are interviewed in this that are true, real deal, worldwide thought leaders with end of life, like Robert Thurman.
So how did you get involved?
I have a distinctive haircut. It is purple or blue, and the sides of my head are shaved.
Although I will say not as distinctive in New Orleans as probably
yes,
other places.
It's lovely. Yeah. So I kind of stuck out, and I think they were like, who is that purple-haired girl? Because she's definitely not a funeral director, because funeral directors don't dress like that. So I was introduced to the team through that. Gotcha. And the Art of Dying conference is every 2 years in Manhattan, and the next one is in 2017, and it's multiple days, all about death, and there's nurses and doctors and just regular people and bereavement people, grief counselors, social workers that all just come, and it's just death conversation. And it's really positive. People hug, they're crying, they're going out to lunch. I mean, it's like, if you want to have a death party, the Art of Dying conference is the place to be.
Well, as you're talking about the Art of Dying conference, I'm thinking what most people would think of when they think of, like, just the name alone would be such a turnoff. And Cole's face is lighting up as she's talking about it.
Yes.
Like, it really, for you, does seem like such a calling.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I have to say, I don't know how I got so lucky to be. I just turned 30 this past summer, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm 30 years old, and I wake up every day grateful for my clients, just thrilled to be alive and to have another day, and to be talking about and working with a subject like death, which I know is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. I have very close family members that can't even talk to me about what I do, because a lot of people are really scared of death. But lean into it. Lean into your fear of death. It is worth it. It is absolutely worth it.
I hear you talking about so many beginnings that have formed as a result of the subject of death for you.
Yes. And this happens in a lot of family units too, when, for example, when the matriarch or the patriarch of a family dies. You know, this is what's hard about death, is all the people that are left behind, they have to reorganize their family structure. Like, oh my gosh, we can't have Christmas at grandma's house this year because grandma is dead. So who's going to take it? You know what I mean? But what's happening is it's tree building. Our family trees are continuing to grow and spread out, but we all are connected at the trunk. And death is, I say this a lot, so I don't remember, but death is salt. Death is the salt of life. And we get doses of salt all throughout our life. And salt is great because it enhances the flavor. So if you are someone that is really afraid of death, really afraid of talking about it, when death comes for you, yourself personally, or a friend of yours dies, or a family member, it's going to amplify those feelings that you already have. If you have presence with death, the salt's going to come, and you're going to feel more present and more open. I can't think, even in my own family when we've had deaths, what's wonderful about it is we're all in someone's house, we're all openly crying together, we're all openly hugging with each other. I mean, you're more connected with your family unit when you are all simultaneously grieving a loss. You don't do that at birthday parties or the 4th of July, right? You don't have that level of connection really anywhere else other than when there's a death. Death is one of the few places on this planet where you can honestly, truly find truth. Like real deal, unfiltered truth. The mask comes off.
How do you think about your own death?
So a part of the integrative thanatology program, it was a really great exercise. We had to think about what we wanted at our end of life. So I really thought about, and a lot of the questions were like, let's say that I'm dying of cancer, which statistically I'm probably going to die of cancer. It's just the numbers. What do I want the room to be like? Do I want to be in a hospital? Do I want to die at home? Like, what do I want to be by a window? What kind of comforter do I want? Do I want to wear a certain type of PJs? You know what I mean? Like these little tiny details. Who do I want in the room with me? Do I want any scents? Like what death, the process of dying. Also, I don't want to sound like I'm like excited to die, because I mean, I'm not. Like I have a lot of stuff that I hope to be able to accomplish in my life, but I do feel less uncertainty having given thought to what I would like to be happening while I'm actively dying, whether I'm coherent or not. Just sitting down and thinking about what kind of pillow I like and what kind of scents I like essential oils or something like that in the room, and if I want people to be standing or sitting, if I want music. Just knowing those kind of things and knowing that I have that document saved that my husband can pull up or whoever, that eliminates some uncertainty. And I may get hit by a bus and that's out the window, but you do what you can, just like in life. You eliminate uncertainty as best you can.
So I appreciate what you're saying about that, the kind of intimacy that something like a death creates. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really does create opportunity.
Yeah. But it can be scary when not everyone's comfortable with intimacy, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I totally get that. But just an awareness that try to lean in a little bit and be aware of it if you're someone that does struggle with that, because it will add beautiful flavor to your life.
Well, it certainly seems like it's doing that for you.
Yes, I feel very energized by my work in this field, and I feel really fortunate to be around so many people that are so much smarter than I am and more trained. It's like every day I wake up and I'm like, I don't know shit, and it's awesome.
That's a great perspective.
Yeah.
Well, it has been so cool to have you here.
Thank you for the opportunity. I love talking about death and what I do, and I'm really excited about it. There's so much potential for so many people, and I know it's a difficult, uncomfortable subject, but it is so worth exploring.
Well, I think you made that really clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The word death evokes all sorts of personal feelings, images, and stories. These stories are compelling, and sharing them connects us more fully to life. I'm Arian Elfont, and you have been listening to Death the Podcast. Join us for our next episode in this series. This show is produced and engineered by Eric Merle. Our associate producer is Jill Gross. Our theme music, It Happened, is written by David Milling and is performed by David Milling and Charles Milling. To hear more of David's music, go to his website, davidmilling.com. If you're listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher or some other podcast app, if you can take a moment to rate and review us, that helps other people find us. You can find Death the Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, or at deaththepodcast.com. Death the Podcast is a production of INO Broadcasting.
You know Labor Day signals the unofficial end of summer, but not the end of your outdoor projects. Lowe's helps you do it right and helps you save with Labor Day deals throughout the store. Shop now and get 2 bags of Stay Green potting mix for $12. And keep your lawn looking neat and trim with a Craftsman 2-cycle 17-inch gas string trimmer, now $20 off at just $119. Whatever's still on your to-do list this Labor Day, do it right for less. Start with Lowe's. Offers valid through 8/28. Soil offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii, U.S. only.